Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Women in Leadership Talk podcast. We are super excited today having Levy joining us. Lisa is considered the disruption catalyst speaker. So we're excited to learn about how she is a disruptor today. Lisa, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Vicki, thank you so much for having me here.
Well, we're thrilled to have you and excited to jump into this conversation. And I want to take a moment and thank our audience for being here. We know you have a choice as to, where you spend your time and what podcast you listen to. And so we're super grateful that you've picked this episode to have a listen and hear about how you can be a disruptor as well. So let's jump in. Let me give you a little bit of background on Lisa so you have some context. Lisa her experience spans for more than 25 years in many industries, which might include utilities, healthcare, finance, banking, identity theft protection. That's a big one right now. Academia, state, and city government. She's also the founder and CEO of Lcubed Consulting for the past 12 years. And that's a business that helps organizations elevate through their strategic goal achievement. She's also a best-selling author with her story featured in an anthology book, Gift of the Universe Through Women That Lead, which is endorsed by Mark Victor Hansen. Lisa now travels the world virtually and conducts live events, helping men and women, business leaders and entrepreneurs deliver results by focusing on critical items and overcoming trivial distractions. Love that. I love that, love that, love that, because I hate those trivial distractions. So Lisa, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. I highlighted the book that I'm not showing in my background today. That's just the way it goes.
Yes.
But I'm happy to be here with this conversation with this audience, right? Women in leadership. It is our time to step into the light and own our place at the table.
Yes.
And so I appreciate the audience participating and joining us today and this conversation, Vicki. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. Well, let's jump in. Let's talk a little bit about your background. So, let's get into, sort of where you were, what led you into starting your own business, becoming a multi author. You've had a number of books. So let's get into, what led you to today.
Absolutely. And the journey to today was absolutely unplanned.
Love it.
Which for me, as I start to describe who I am and what I do, is really uncomfortable to realize that I'm a planner by trade. And I have gone on this journey called life that has taken me in directions that I never anticipated. In college, I wanted to become a film director. I studied video production because that was the first level of the access that I could get my hands on. But I wanted to make films. I wanted to impact emotion and the audience and take them on a journey, right? An emotional journey for 90 minutes to 2.5 hours and impact their life. And as I continued my studies and I started to see how small that space really is, I had a reality check and I said, I don't know that I can be that one in a million that's going to make this happen. What do I do with my life? So I have a degree in video production and I start looking around at local news outlets, right? The local affiliates. And I would have made less money working in my field than I would have made flipping burgers at McDonald's.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And that was
check.
Total reality check. And I never wanted to do that work to begin with. It was the middle of the 1990s and the information technology boom was happening. IT was the place to be. And I knew nothing about technology, right? I had a computer. I had to get through school, right? I'm learning that as I was going. But what I did learn in film production and video production was a process to plan work, execute work, and do something else and move on to that next thing. And that translated very directly into the discipline of project management. And I talked myself into a job in technology as a recruiter. But because I was able to start to understand this process called project management, I worked my way into the role. And I built a career because I'm able to understand that you have to plan something, do something, wrap it up, and move on and do the next thing. And so that's where my career began. Had no idea, no intention, no desire. I don't like technology that much. But there are things I'm curious, right? And I started watching these projects that companies were paying millions of dollars to implement new technology, the latest, the greatest, and these projects failed, and they failed miserably. And I wanted to know why. And so I started asking questions and peeling things back. And I started to understand that technology only enables process. It doesn't do anything we don't tell it to do. And if we don't tell it to do the right things, it gives us super fast bad.
Yeah.
And so I started understanding how processes work. And if we get the right processes, then we can automate with technology. But for processes to work, we have to take a step back further and understand who are the people doing the work.
Right. Yeah.
And over this, I've come up with this equation. It's people plus process times technology equals scale and growth. If we don't work the equation the right way, we fail. And businesses are failing at implementing technology and changing processes for decades. This idea, well, I thought I was having this brilliant revelation, was actually documented in the 1960s at Stanford. And this organization in the 1960s.
Okay.
A great revelation in the early now 2000s had been documented as in organizational research at Stanford in the 1960s. So I still feel brilliant because I recreated it all for myself. I feel like an idiot because I wasn't the first. And I'm also not the only one who's figured it out. Every management consulting firm in the world works on this principle. Right. Some do it better than others. I hope that I do it better than most, because we really want to have people in the environments doing the work that drives value for them, that drives value for their customers. And that starts to get a momentum in a business for it to grow and scale and change and get to what we really want to talk about, being disruptive.
Yeah.
So that's the journey in and all of that. I left corporate. I created Lcubed Consulting because the traditional consulting model was broken. Yes, all of these people understood the same equation that I do, but they don't do it well, and they don't do it right, and they don't do it with the best interest of their clients, customers.
Okay.
Right? It's not about my bottom line. It is not about my business, my consulting company in any way, shape, or form. It's about my clients, customers getting value from the products and services they're buying. And that's been missing for so long in what's done everywhere else, that is the beginning of businesses becoming disruptive. And it's challenging the status quo and the way we've always done it.
Yeah. Well, that's a really important message that you just shared, because I mean, human beings, we are typically very self-interested, right? It's what's in it for us. And what I'm hearing you say is it's really, taking that next level approach of it's not about you, it's about what the end user consumer is experiencing. And then therefore, when that is done optimally at its fullest potential, then it impacts the organization, you personally, so forth, so on.
Right. It absolutely does. But if we don't get to that very beginning place, that consumer, we can have the best ideas. And you see it time and time again. Great products, BlackBerry, right? They were the original handheld device.
I was a user, talking about that yesterday.
I was a user, and I've said, in years gone by, you will pry it out of my cold dead hand. It is the best piece of technology ever invented. Well, guess what? They failed to listen and understand the changing needs of their consumer, and they're irrelevant and they're gone. Blockbuster Video, where did they go? Right? They failed to adapt to change. And that is that critical thing, right? Disruption comes in two forms. Right. There's the disruption that happens around us that we have no control of. Market changes, pandemics, economic downturns. We don't drive that, right? We have no direct control, but we do have control of what we do and how we do it. Are we okay with what we're doing today? And will today's results sustain us and our businesses in 6 months, 9 months, 5 years from now? I'm going to wager the answer to that is no. And choosing to challenge that status quo and be disruptive inside our own space drives innovation, and that drives our business growth and success for the long term.
Okay. Good. Well, so let's talk a little bit about, you just mentioned pandemic, economic downturn. Like, there is like multitudes of complexities that are happening around us, within us, and leaders are in a constant state of, chaos and what's next, and it's not easy to be ahead a year, 6 years from where you are today, right? Because we have no control over that outside environment. Sorry. So what are you seeing as some of those, main reasons for so much disruption and chaos?
So I think disruption and chaos is always there. I think there are times we choose to try to ignore it. And there are times when it is just so blatantly in our face, we have no choice but to suck it up and face it head on.
Right.
For me, and what I teach and coach and advise my leaders to do in their environment is to embrace a willingness to constantly change.
Right.
Because we fear change on a level instinctively, humanistically, right? We fear it. But if we can have a mindset where we're ready to embrace it, we can deal with whatever that disruption is. And so having that mindset, some people we use the language about being agile.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely right. It's a big thing right now, and we hear it and we see it everywhere. But what does it really mean? Mm-hmm. To me, it means being able to adapt to change, whether it's our change or change thrust upon us, knowing how to do it.
Yeah.
And those are processes that we can learn. There are processes that we can teach people inside our organizations, and it allows us to constantly evolve. If we can constantly evolve, we can constantly thrive. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I saw the curiosity.
Yes, thank you. Nice. You're paying attention to me there, Lisa. Thank you. Yeah. So, and you're 100% correct. Like, people in general are terrified of change. Right. And you see people holding on to processes. You see people holding on to what's always been because it's comfortable. Right. Mm-hmm. And it makes it okay for you to just do what you've always done and hoping that the results will turn out. So yeah, exactly. It's a wishful hope. Yes. Right. So maybe just take a second and talk about the process, one or two things that you do with people on that mindset to help them embrace change versus holding on to the status quo or what always has been.
So I have no secret sauce that isn't, everybody has access to this, right? There are best practices in organizational change management. And that's part of what I love and what I do, right, is take best practices and combine them and make them a little bit more adoptable in smaller organizations. Unless you're a multi-billion-dollar corporation, you probably aren't going to develop large teams of people who specialize in this. But the skills everybody can understand, right? We need to be aware of what the change is. Mm. What is it? Why is it happening? Why is it important to the company? Why is it important to my department? Why is it important to me? Mm-hmm. And the ever popular, what's in it for me?
Sure.
For going on this journey of change with you. And those messages aren't always sunny, rosy, optimistic things, right? In a pandemic, right? Some of that is painful. But if I understand personally what's in it for me, I can then make a decision to participate. Until I make that personal decision to commit to the participating in the change, there's nothing anyone can do to make me participate. It is a personal choice. Once I've made it, I'm on the train. And now you need to build my knowledge. You need to explain it to me, teach me, show me, let me practice and learn what the new thing is. And then it can become real and we can repeat it over time. And I'm an adult learner. So I might need some reinforcement along the way. 6 months after this change has happened, you might have to kind of remind me and refresh me. And that's the thing that we forget. Change doesn't end when we say, here's a new system or here's a new process. We have to reinforce it over time, or I will naturally revert back to what was comfortable for me. Then that way I've always done it. So it's a process of awareness, building a desire for me to participate, building the knowledge and skills and the capability of doing it, implementing the change and reinforcing it. What I've just described is roughly the ProSci organizational change management model. There are lots of different ways of packaging it, but the general idea is basically the same. I need to know what it is, what's in it for me. I want to participate in it, and then I can.
Okay. Well, and oftentimes, at least, what I see when it comes to change for people, communication is usually the biggest culprit, right? I mean, that's where either it lands or it doesn't land, because, you are selling the vision of change, and that is constantly, the change is constantly changing as well. Right. Yes. And so to your point, that reinforcement has to be constant because our environment is changing. There's different nuances, different things that we learn. But what are your thoughts on how we get better and more fluid at those with those discussions, and how that work can flow more naturally so people embrace versus resist?
So the challenge over time has been that there was this mindset that we need to piecemeal information in a way, right? We don't want to shock people. We don't want to startle them. We want to coddle them. I don't believe that people need to be coddled. I think people need to understand what's happening and why. And, Simon Sinek, right? Everything comes back to why. And if we really, really, truly get that, we can be really authentic. We can be really honest. We don't want to scare people intentionally if, we're navigating, difficult change, but we need to respect people's abilities to get what we're throwing down. And so I think in the past, while the communication is key, and at every step of that, right, awareness, desire, right, all of these are communication tools. But I think that we overcrafted what we were communicating and overcomplicated our messages. And if we really just embrace the keep it simple mindset, it becomes a lot easier. And people, if they get the message and they receive it as an authentic statement, it's easier to take in and to say, okay, yeah, all right, I get it. When we try and sugarcoat it and we try and package it and present something that might be negative, right? Our sales are down.
We're just camouflaging it.
Right. We're camouflaging, we're hiding it, and we're insulting the people we work with.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
And we need to not do that.
Yeah. Well, you lose a lot of credibility when you do that, right? Because to your point, have the thought of positive intent, right?
Yes.
You're sharing information of here's reality. And give them the courtesy of, they're part of this and they will help us navigate through it.
Absolutely. Because a group of people, and let's just call them who they are, senior leaders sitting in a conference room, they are bright, they are intelligent, they are capable, they got there for a reason, but they are a small percentage of the overall organization.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And so the knowledge across the larger whole of that community is greater and will come up with better ideas and will have better feedback and input, right? So the more voices we have in the process of deciding what the change is, designing how to do it, right? The more voices influencing that, the better the outcome is going to be.
Sure.
And as we communicate to people, actually taking feedback in is critical to our success, because whatever we came up with in that room, the best and the brightest, and it's all good stuff, it is not complete and it is not perfect.
Yeah. Well, they're not living it day to day. So
right.
But it's also, I think beyond that, it's including the voices that need to be heard with respect to how to execute and navigate those changes, because directly they're the ones impacted by that. And so you can surface that, and you can, here's thinking, what are your thoughts, right? Like really be inclusive in those conversations.
And, we mentioned earlier, Vicki, you actually said it, right? Not everybody wants to lead change, right? There's a natural resistance. And actually, there are numbers to support it. Maybe about 5% of people are active change agents, change champions who go looking for it, for the fun of looking for it, because, right, that's where they get their energy. And then there's about that same 5% on the lagging end who will resist it with everything they have until the end of time, because that's just who they are. Everybody else is in the middle somewhere, right? There's a group of people looking to those leaders to lead change. And if there's a plan, they will happily follow it. And, you get fewer and fewer, and, the more and more resistance, but the majority of people, 90%, are willing to go on that journey if you get them engaged the right way.
Yeah.
And that's a huge number. And so I love when, putting together a team of people that's going to lead change. I actually want to find one of those very vocal naysayers. Because if we create an approach that they can believe in, they then become one of those leaders of change who will shout from the rooftops about how powerful it is if you've convinced them properly. Yeah. And so I love having those voices at the beginning and watching them, hopefully, right? And, I don't like to cross my fingers and hope for anything, but when you get it right and you get them to become the change agent, you will take the entire company on that journey, because everybody knows how vocally they resist everything.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great point. So who do you see, Lisa? Maybe share an example of, it could be a leader that you've seen make this transformation, or an organization who does that really well, because I think it's important to have some examples, some real life that people go, I see how this company has transformed and have adopted or adapted to, those environmental things that are happening, whether it's COVID, pandemic, economies, whatever.
Yeah. So, I have several stories, but I want to share one from a type of an organization that is not known to be disruptive and not known to be innovative. Okay. And I was doing some work with a state agency coming out of the pandemic. So in the 2021 timeframe, they had responded and done everything that they could, but they were looking around and things still weren't working well.
Okay.
And so we had to take the leadership team through a mindset shift of, as a governmental agency, the way we've always done it was entrenched. Sure. I mean, entrenched in ways like they have built cement walls around cement walls in the way that they've always done things, because there are people who have been in those roles for literally 30 and 40 years. Mm-hmm. And until they retire, there's probably not much that really is going to change unless there's a brilliant aha moment. Mm-hmm. Coming out of the pandemic and things that happened, there were a tremendous number of audits happening. And everybody was scrutinizing where money went, how it was used, mm-hmm. and things, right? It was a big deal. And every state in the country was being scrutinized for how they used the pandemic dollars and how did they get to the people and all of those things. And we came in as a team to go through that whole journey, right? What were their processes? Who were the people doing the work? What were their processes? How were they using technology? And the underlying question was there fraud committed? Right? That's this thing that we're looking for. And everybody's looking for it because from a sensational perspective, we could find that, right? Oh, great stories and turmoil and all of this. What we found were really good people who were working really hard with and living in quicksand because the rules and everything changed around them daily, trying to scotch tape and bubblegum together technology systems to keep things working that were never designed to do the things that they were doing and that they were changing every 30, 60, and 90 days. The people were exhausted, frazzled, and just flat out done. Mm-hmm. There wasn't fraud. There was no sensational story. The sensational story was that these people continued to do what they needed to do to support their community, their populace, through the worst of times. Did not get big news stories out of that finding. Mm-hmm. But we did find these people who were trying so desperately. And so we spent several months after that helping them understand how to change more effectively, how to get the right people doing the new work. What is that new work? Understanding the processes and putting in the ability for ongoing continuous improvement. Mm-hmm. Change happens regularly. And as soon as something isn't working right, somebody needs to question it and change it. And so we taught them basic principles. We taught them project management. We taught them process management. We taught them organizational change management and principles of ongoing continuous improvement. These are huge best practices that in a traditional environment, right, you would send one or two people and they would go to school and they would learn these things and they'd take courses and get certified. And that information would be in the hands of one or two people who could never influence it across the organization. Mm-hmm. Well, we did it with teams of people. And I'll be honest, right, we aren't educators that are certifying them to be project management professionals or Six Sigma practitioners, but we're giving them enough to make the processes work. And then finding the people who are really good at it and sending those people off to become certified, to start leading smaller teams so that they were building organically inside of themselves.
Nice. Okay.
Right. And so it's a grassroots kind of movement. Obviously, leadership sanctioned this, right? They had to be on board because we turned their organization upside down. Right? They were no longer being directed from above. The people on the teams were saying, this is what needs to happen next. Mm-hmm. And this is how we're going to do it.
Okay. Very good. Very good. And so that's a great example of somebody who's doing it in a good way, right? So they're building that pipeline, they're putting processes in place. They are, really looking at whatever the situations might be, but there's a methodology to how they break down.
Yep.
So what about those who do it wrong and bad, which I know there's countless examples of, but maybe just pick one where, it gives our audience a sense of how to even question what's happening, right? Because I think that's the power.
So it is. And, the best bad example is the leader who is in their own mind the smartest person in the room, the one person who has the answer to every question, the one person who can do everything better than anyone else.
Yeah.
Right. So immediately we are in a closed space where new ideas will not be heard, where we can't even talk about floating ideas, right? Because if it was important, I would already have done it, say me. That is still prevalent. It still exists, and that exists at a supervisor level in a large team, at a manager, at a director, at a vice president, at a CEO, right? These things, it can exist anywhere inside of the organization, and it stifles everything.
Yeah.
And the challenge
if you know everything.
No, and you don't let your people grow.
Yeah.
Because they're now, if they aren't inherently doing everything the way you would do it, They're incompetent, they're inept, they're all of the things. Why are they even on my team? I need to get rid of them and replace them. And so you start to see symptoms, right? You start to see teams that have high attrition rates. You start to see really good people, and you know that they're really good people jumping ship quickly.
Right.
These are symptoms that you start to see of that. You start to see numbers and performance overall declining in that space. And though I am the best I could possibly be, and the whole reason this is happening is blame, 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 right? These are the symptoms, and it's a dangerous example because depending on where that person sits in the organization or how many of them you have in an organization, because that mindset breeds that mindset and it's toxic.
Yeah.
Filtering it out and removing it requires incredible strength and integrity from other leaders, from their peers. And when you're talking about it being the tone at the top coming down that way,
yeah,
that's a hard one. That's a hard one to fix unless there's a board of directors who can do it.
Yeah. Well, I think that you've highlighted several things. It is very difficult when it's the very top, the owner, the CEO, whatever that title might be. And I'm cognizant of our time today, but maybe share, if you're in that situation, let's say it's a mid-level supervisor who's blocking, what could be one thing that a person could do to go around, go above, or even face straight on with that individual? What would your recommendations be?
There is complexity and there is risk in this conversation for the person who is seeing it, right? So there's, first and foremost, understanding what your risk tolerance is. There are people who will walk in and have that conversation head on, risk be damned. If they get fired on the spot, they're fine with it because they did what they thought needed to be done.
Right.
And there are others who could never do that. And so, each person will make their decision their own way. But somehow a light needs to be shown on the situation. If you are strong enough to go and have that conversation directly, more power to you. Know what your next steps are, right? You're going to have that conversation. And what are 3 response steps after that? You probably want to be prepared to have a conversation with HR that you had the conversation so that you aren't fired for gross insubordination for no particular reason. If you aren't comfortable having those conversations, do you have a peer that you can talk with? Can the 2 of you go to another supervisor of a similar level to get to that individual's peer group? There's very different ways, and it's hard to say what the right answer is because the nuances of the culture dictate what's appropriate. But in every healthy organization, taking a skip level meeting for that type of a reason should be embraced. And so going to your boss's boss should be something that you're able to do without fear of repercussion. Mm-hmm. Again, corporate culture is the only thing that can answer if that'll work specifically.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great response. I think that you're absolutely right. It is looking at the whole of the organization and what's that culture, what are those dynamics, and it is personal tolerance, right? And part of that too is when you become that voice, it's recognizing that most likely you're not the only person feeling this way, and so you are taking on a huge responsibility, to be that voice for all being impacted by it, but such an important role to play as well. Especially if you are passionate about the organization and the health of the organization. So risky, yes, but definitely I think it's important to do that. Yeah. So Lisa, this has been a really interesting conversation. And just before we wrap up, maybe just talk a little bit about future-proofing Cubed. So you wrote this book, and I know we didn't talk about that earlier, so I just want to tie that in. So maybe give us just, top 3 highlights. What would somebody take from that book? Like, why would it be important for them to read it?
So we actually talked a lot about it without talking about it.
Oh, okay, good.
In Future Proof and Cubed, I outline our framework of adaptive transformation. And what that is taking those best practices, project management, process management, organizational change, and leveraging them not as individual standalone things, but collectively as this framework across all lines of business, so that you're building that ability to be adaptable, to be able to scale and embrace change. So Future Proofing Cubed, which is available on Amazon,
Perfect.
Is going to take you through that whole experience with what are those best practices, how do you use them, and conversations and stories from leaders who lead with this agile mindset and embrace this leveraging of these tools in new and different ways than the standard teachings would give you. So it's sort of a handbook on how to do some of the things that I described doing with my clients.
Nice. And how do people reach you if they've got questions about, even the process that you use? How can they find you?
I am easily found at lisallevy.com. And that will take you into all things for me speaking, all things Lcubed from the consulting, and LinkedIn, Lisa L. Levy. And on YouTube, our channel is Lcubed Consulting.
Awesome. Okay. So everybody, you heard that, you know how to get in touch with Lisa. If you have questions, and looking at your organization and what is your tolerance to change. I think that's a really important conversation to have, especially now that, we're coming out of the pandemic and we have learned a lot. But doing an evaluation on what is that tolerance for change and understanding the importance of it, that it doesn't go away. There'll be something else. So it's how do we adapt a fluid way of working with change and embracing change. Scary, yes, no question. Not saying it's easy, but it's so important. So Lisa, thank you. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule and spending time with us today. I think there was some great nuggets that came from this conversation. And if our audience, if you have questions, feel free, you can reach out to me. I will share them with Lisa, or you can go directly to Lisa. Because, the important thing here is to keep conversations alive and helping us look at how do we make those improvements. So Lisa, thank you. Thank you for being here.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me to the conversation.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. And for our audience, thank you for being here today. And as I said, if you have any questions, you can reach out to me directly. You can reach out to Lisa. She's given you all the ways to connect with her. And if you're curious about your own leadership and how you are as a leader, you can go on willempowered.com. That's 1L, willempowered.com, and take our free leadership quiz. And that'll give you some insight as to your own leadership style. And if you have questions about what your findings are, happy to have a conversation with you. You can reach me at Vicki@willempowered.com and be happy to have a conversation. So thank you again for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you on our next Will Talk podcast. Take care, everyone. Thank you.